Hello, this is Robin Abad Ocubillo. I'm currently the Director of Shared Spaces for the City and County of San Francisco. I'm also a curator and editor working with social practice artists around issues of civics. In this episode of the Urbanistica Podcast with Mustafa Sharif, we talk about the long experiment of parklets in San Francisco and around the world and how that's transformed not only our physical streetscapes, but also our mental and emotional, psychological, and cultural attitudes. I hope you enjoy the conversation we had. Tune in.
Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica Podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner AFRI. AFRI is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it.
Today we have a new story from Pontevedra. I have the pleasure to welcome you, Robin, to Urbanistica Podcast. Hey, and welcome.
Hey.
How are your days here in Pontevedra?
They've been wonderful. Love this gathering. I love the Placemaking Week Europe. They're really smart, passionate group of people who are actually doing things and making things happen.
Yeah.
So it's really inspiring to be with them, learning about how they're working on public policy, they're working on new laws, they're working on new regulations, but then they're also on the ground building projects, working with communities. There's a lot of integrity in the work that the people here at this gathering are doing around Europe and around the world.
Yeah.
So I love getting together with them, and Pontevedra is such an incredible setting too.
True.
Yeah.
So what is, you have an activity within the program here?
Yeah, there have been there are a couple discussions, a couple sessions that I'm participating in or will be participating in. Well, there's a keynote session tonight. Today's Thursday, the 29th of September.
Yeah.
Pontevedra. So there's a keynote this evening about bringing people together, togetherness and empathy, and placemaking as a practice for, how we're bringing diverse groups together that maybe aren't in contact or aren't in empathetic contact. So I'm really excited about that. We have folks from Scotland, Copenhagen, the Global South, myself from the West Coast, the best coast, America. So that'll be in the square this evening, and it's taking place out of doors and is open to everyone in Pontevedra to come.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So we start with you. You are our storyteller. How would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us about your passion?
Oh, great. Okay. So my full name, I'm Robin Abad Ocubillo, and I am currently the Director of Shared Spaces for the City and County of San Francisco. It's a public program and municipal program. I can tell you a little bit more about that and what we're doing and why we're doing later. But I'm also a curator and an editor working with social practice artists around projects, related to civics, again, empathy, togetherness. So that's something that I do adjacent to, my full-time job, working for the city.
And what are you passionate about?
Well, I guess taking the theme of this week, Placemaking Week, I'm really passionate about how this practice that we call placemaking, that's one way to sort of label, I think, and group the set of associated practices that we have in bringing communities together. And I think that placemaking can be an approach to addressing some of the difficult emotional and psychological and social conflicts that we have, questions that we have. So I'm really enthusiastic about, I'm someone who works in government and I'm a civil servant. So I'm very passionate about public service
Yeah.
and attacking these problems, thinking about these challenges from that sector, if you will. But I think we have an opportunity, we have a mandate to engage people civically, in a civic sense, in democracy. And working in public spaces and in physical places is a huge opportunity for getting closer to that.
Yeah. And Robin, was it a specific moment that you found your passion, or it's something you grow up with time? Because many people asking, like, how can I find my passion? Like, was it like a specific moment, or no, it's like a journey you're making and that's how?
I love that question. I think it's definitely an evolution over time, no? As a child, you have certain experiences, you have certain memories. I'm the child of immigrants. So my parents are Filipino immigrants. My grandparents were Filipino immigrants. They came from the Philippines to California in the late 70s, shortly before I was born. And the context that they were coming from at the time was there was a dictatorship. There was a dictatorial regime that was running the Philippines at the time. And this past year, we've sort of come full circle in terms of the narrative around, who's at the head of the Philippine state. But that's another podcast. So my parents, they were young people in their, early adulthood, in their early 20s. And they were leaving a situation that and coming to a new situation where maybe there would be more opportunity. Certainly there would be more opportunity to participate in democratic government. So fleeing the dictatorial regime, coming to the States, they raised us. We were always volunteering in our community. We grew up in a little church community in Northeast Los Angeles. And every time there was a vote, my parents would go to vote, and they would impress upon us the importance of participating and shaping, participating in this collective effort to shape how we live our lives and how society is structured. And so I think that was the earliest part, the importance of democratic participation and the institutions of democracy and communitarianism. And our church was very focused on public works and charitable work. So there was a lot of volunteering as a kid.
Yeah. Did this affect what you studied in university?
I think eventually, in a way, it's been professionally and academically and personally, it's been a long road to get to where I am. And there were a lot of fun detours. I'm also really inspired, I mentioned earlier, by art and, visual culture, musical culture, and its potential to impact you emotionally and psychologically as a human being. So as a kid growing up in Los Angeles, of course, you're watching a lot of television, you're watching a lot of film. I think growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was kind of there's a lot of, and even now, there's just like so much explosion of creativity around art and film. So for the longest time, I actually wanted to become a filmmaker.
Nice.
Because I was so enchanted by this medium.
Yeah.
The possibility of creating other worlds and world building, and whether that was
beautiful world.
Yeah. Well, I think even in dystopic film, it's an important exploration. It's important depiction because it reminds us of what shouldn't be, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make films, and I went to university. I started going to school in a film and theater school to create sets. I wanted to be a production designer, maybe a cinematographer, and create worlds, create settings. My love of history and especially music theory, music history kind of was part of a strong interest I have in like historicism.
Yeah.
But Mustafa, I realized as a young kid that I was surrounded by so many people in this theater program that were just artists, like to their core. They were diehard artists, live or die, rich or poor.
Yeah.
And I couldn't locate that artistic commitment like in my person. And at the same time, I was also really interested, in architecture, design.
Yeah.
And so eventually became a landscape architect. I got a master's degree in landscape architecture, and the pursuits are similar, right? It's about, in a way, manipulating the sensory experience, looking to history, looking to mythology, looking to metaphysics as a way to sort of create an environment and a mood and communicate around emotion.
But also, like, what you produce as a landscape architect, like, will stay physically. I mean, as a movie producer, the movies, it's like somewhere up, or it's not like here physically. It's affecting people's life somehow. But as a landscape architect, you have much more impact on people's life. So hopefully the design you do, we're going to talk about it more, is like affecting in a positive way.
I think you're right. It's a physical practice.
Yeah.
It's about real space and real settings, and that's really fulfilling to work in, now in urban design around issues of urban form or streetscape design. It does have a measurable, tangible impact.
Yeah.
That you can see and you can feel. It's very immediate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start from like a small scale parklet. Like some people maybe underestimate it, but it has a huge impact on city.
That's a really astute way of assessing the parklet typology. Yeah. So for folks who are listening, what is a parklet? A parklet is when we'll take a piece of the road, usually where cars are parked, the curbside lane. Maybe we'll take 1 parking space, 2, 4, and we'll convert that to a small park. And this is a typology that has a lot of early experimentation. It's, in a way, its origins in San Francisco. In the mid and late 2000s, there was an sort of architecture renegade activist group called Rebar. They don't exist anymore, but their principles are still in the world, doing important work and amazing things. And there was an installation that they had put into downtown San Francisco in 2005 that was really electrifying. There's maybe 3 or 4 pictures of this.
Wow.
But it inspired so many people. And then so soon after that, a colleague and a mentor of mine, Andres Power, who was working at our former council member's office, Scott Wiener, who's now a state senator, and this was under the administration of Mayor Gavin Newsom, who is now our California's governor.
Yeah,
took this idea, and were really inspired by what was a kind of subversive renegade act, trying to figure out, okay, how can we adapt this to actually make it something that the city will embrace, will sanction, will include as part of our toolbox for how we improve the quality of life in streets, for how we engage communities, small business owners, other folks in neighborhoods who are interested in stewarding and having ownership over their local neighborhood.
And what is like the process from having an idea to creating a parklet that people can use? Can you guide us through this?
Absolutely. It looks really different now than it did 12 years ago, 10 years ago when folks started this. So it's much simpler of a process now. For many years, there was a long design interval. There's a long design process where, let's say, Mustafa has a pizzeria, and you're a pizzeria that's been on your high street for 20 years. You're a beloved local institution. You want to invest in your community, in your public space by creating a parklet.
Yeah.
Before the pandemic, you would have submitted an application to the city, and it could have taken you as long as 18 months to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very detailed design review.
You send in the drawings as well, right? Or just a concept idea?
It could start with a concept, but eventually would need to result in a set of approved plans.
Yeah.
And before COVID, we had about 60 parklets in San Francisco as a result of this process. After COVID, as a consequence of a new way of doing this, which I could talk about a little bit too, we peeled back, we suspended a lot of those processes and those regulations. It's a lot of the theme that we've been talking about here at Placemaking Week Europe.
Yeah.
How can the government and government programs make it easier for people in neighborhoods to, improve their neighborhoods, to beautify their neighborhoods, to improve the social conditions on the streets in their neighborhoods.
So Robin, before you continue, so it's like the people apply to make a parklet.
That's right.
Okay, because in Sweden we have the opposite. It's the government who create the parklets.
I see, yeah.
Like completely the opposite. Not in all cases, but in many of the cases. Like one in Helsingborg, it was like the government thinking about, okay, let's do something here.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that there is people doing it.
Right, and I think that shows the flexibility of this typology, the parklet. It's been adapted all over the world in many different cities, and deployed in different ways. The manner that you go about creating one can differ on the local political context, cultural, social context, and I think that's part of what's exciting about typologies like the parklet.
Yeah,
it's such a simple and elegant, essential idea that can serve many purposes and fit well within many different settings.
Yeah. Can you describe to us like the different programs that a parklet can have?
Sure, yeah. Well, at the moment in San Francisco, most parklets are operated by restaurants or cafes. So, there's usually some outdoor dining that happens. It's centered on food. And San Francisco, California's got a very thriving food culture.
Yeah.
And so that's really, really important. But, over the last 10 years, and especially when I was at the helm of the Parklet program, now it's one of the programs under the larger program that I direct. We had schools, art galleries, museums, educational youth development institutions. We had many different nonprofit organizations, social service organizations engage in creating parklets.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for parklets to also express a non-commercial purpose and function.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of different types of programs that happen in parklets, and moving forward, we're really looking into how we can continue to expand that sponsorship. All of these institutions, whether it's the ballet or the Modern Art Museum or the youth after school program, all of these organizations have a public interest mission, and that can be expressed and that can take place in the out of doors. Why not?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So can you describe to us, like to our listeners, a parklet, like an example of how a parklet look like?
Sure. Well, parklets are usually quite small. I could attempt to describe their dimensions in meters, but that one.
It's like a size of, but because you mentioned it's like taking a parking space, so it's like a size of a parking space.
Size of a parking space. Yeah. So in imperial measurement terms, it's about 20 feet long by 8 feet wide. So very modest, small. And sometimes, if at Mustafa's Pizzeria, for example, you could talk to your neighbors and take over 2 or 3 spots.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll, with your neighbor next door, maybe they're a bar that's only open in the evenings, or they're a daycare and they're only open during the weekdays during the daytime.
Yeah.
You might share the parklet. So you might be open in the evenings, in the afternoon, serving pizza, but, the daycare next to you might use the parklet during the daytime. Maybe the bar uses it in the evenings on the weekends. And they are small, Mustafa, but I think what we've seen in San Francisco, and I think what we're starting to see around the country and the world, is that as you get more and more of them, and there are concentrations of parklets in neighborhoods, it really does transform the experience of the place.
Yeah.
Your everyday experience. It transforms how merchants and neighborhood leaders, what they want for the long-term future of their physical streetscape, but also the social and economic impacts too are they're manifold. So
so like usually there are like chairs, tables, some greeneries, flowers, plants.
Absolutely, all of the above. And what's really incredible about this idea is that it can take on so many forms. There's so much design expression.
True.
So you'll have parklets that are all about native plant gardens and plantings for butterflies, and you'll have others that are really interesting, elegant, fantastic designs that are part of the kind of the dining experience. The sponsor.
Is the Parklet a response to that we really design our cities in the wrong way? Like there's no space for activities, for life?
Absolutely. I think the initial inspiration for Parklets, and one of the things that drove the creation of this typology, was the autocentric form, urban form, especially in American cities, which are younger certainly than most of the towns and cities here in Europe. But narrow paths, narrow footpaths, narrow sidewalks, high traffic speeds, wide roads, very inhumane, inhospitable environment for living everyday life. When we talk about the practice of everyday life, which Michel Desserteau wrote about, or The Right to the City, which Henri Lefebvre wrote about, I think we look at our American streetscapes, and it's immediately apparent how difficult it is for mobility, the public health impacts of having such an auto-dependent environment. So in San Francisco, which has a long history of this, actually predating the Parklet, there's been a lot of sort of work and protest regarding the way our streets look and feel.
Yeah. But is it true that like when you remove parking spaces and then you put Parklet, then it's going to affect the economy because like going to be less visitors, or it's not convenient for people driving?
In fact, the studies that we've run have shown that Parklets have a positive impact, especially for the small businesses that operate in the neighborhood. Not only the sponsoring business, not only Mustafa's Pizzeria, but your neighbors as well. And so what's been interesting about the pandemic and the expansion of the program that we undertook under the prompting of our Mayor London Breed in San Francisco, is that now everyone wants a Parklet. Neighborhood, community benefit districts and merchants associations, they're all clamoring to close their streets.
Yeah.
And if you were to ask, many of the same people 5 years ago, they would have told you that 90% of their 90% of their patrons arrive via car. And so that has been one incredible outcome of scaling the Parklet program and other related programs over the pandemic, reducing bureaucracy, deregulating a little bit and eliminating some of the process we used to have before. It's now so much easier to create a Parklet. Which I think is what the city needs.
Do you think everyone should get a Parklet? Every business, not everyone.
Well, the curb is a contested territory. It's our streets are really complex places. They have to serve many functions.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think everybody needs a Parklet or should have one.
Yeah.
I think that the context, the physical context, is important. We need our streets to accommodate efficient operation of buses and public transport, and goods movement and loading. So there are a lot of demands, but we've been thinking about this obviously for over a decade, and the current iteration of our Parklet program, I think, has dialed in and optimized a lot of the considerations that can have this typology exist more, but in balance with a lot of the other essential things our city needs to do.
What are the criteria that the program considering, like in order to approve a Parklet, and where and so on?
Sure. Physical location, the proposed site, is really important.
Okay.
Design is also really important. All parklets need to be accessible to persons who are using wheelchairs, for example.
Okay.
So universal access is a strong criteria.
The physical location, because you want to control the number of parklets within an area, or why? Like,
it's less about the number and it's more about balancing all the functions that for example, that block,
Okay.
that part of the high street needs to serve. So most of the time, parklets are on corridors where there is also transportation, public transport.
Yeah.
So bus stops, not a good place for a parklet, obviously. We need to reserve that for people to get on and off efficient transit. Also loading, curbside loading. This operates a little bit differently in different cities and countries, but part of the curb needs to be reserved for trucks delivering food or picking up goods and services.
Yeah.
So it's less about specific numbers and more about balancing across the whole corridor, the needs.
Okay. So the location, the design.
Yeah, location, design, sponsorship. I mentioned earlier. We want to incentivize a broad and diverse set of sponsors. So
Okay.
Not
the same
all restaurants
yeah.
and we want retailers and community organizations, community institutions.
Yeah, but there's like when you say sponsorship, like the people who are owning, is it like they're owning it, or how is it? How does it work?
Sure. Yeah. Well, parklets they're a private investment in the public realm. So Mustafa's Pizzeria does own the parklet. Of course, the land belongs
because I'm
to
going to
everybody.
pay and buy the material and the design and everything. So it's mine.
That's right. Yeah, you're also responsible for maintaining it.
Okay.
Clean. Maybe in collaboration with your neighbors if
Of
you're
course,
sharing
yeah.
operations.
But do I need to pay something like rent or something for the city?
There is a permit application fee, and then an annual. It's part of your business license.
Okay.
That you pay. So there is a fee that you pay for the city to administer this program. But this is not a revenue mechanism for the city. We're not earning.
It's not like parking fee.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a vastly different kind of calculus and philosophy for the way that permit fees, license fees are approached for parklets versus parking. Because this is a higher and better use, right, of a place.
Yeah,
so with parklets, we're able to of course create a more humane streetscape environment, right? But we're also able to significantly impact the economy.
Yeah.
Of that corridor. Our public health goals, our street safety goals, our livability goals. These are all things that our parklets are doing that a parked car is not doing.
True. So it's not that the city is making money out of parklets.
That's right.
So it's only like the money goes to to finance the program somehow.
That's right.
Yeah. So other criterias or aspect that you're considering when you approve a parklet?
Again, I think sponsorship, and degree of publicness as well.
Okay.
So starting later this year, after the pandemic version of the new parklet program ends, all parklets are required to have a public seating facility. So Mustafa's Pizzeria, maybe during the 2.5 years of the pandemic, you might have been using all of your parklet to serve pizza, to generate revenue.
Yeah.
Well, starting in April this year, current law says that in April of 2022, you need to reserve a portion of your footprint for anyone to be able to come, sit, enjoy the neighborhood.
Okay. Without paying, like they need to.
Without buying pizza.
Buying pizza.
Yeah.
This is so smart. This is so good for the city.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's important for San Francisco. It's important to remember that before the pandemic, all parklets were fully accessible public facilities at all times. So there was
like 100%. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So commercial activity actually was something that was explicitly prohibited. That was our public policy. Of course, during COVID, we flipped this and we adapted the parklet to stave off the implosion of our small business sector.
So how much percentage you say the public of the Parklet? Is it like a specific percentage or no?
No, it's not a specific percentage. The provision is just for a public seating facility. Yeah. And so I think we will see over the coming years different ways that that's handled, and we'll learn more. We may become more specific, as we see how this works. It's a new idea.
I think that's how you upgrade the program, and it's like by testing.
That's right.
You will never have a super perfect fixed program if you don't test and evaluate. So like some cities, they are so much afraid of starting something, and this is not perfect, this is not going to work, and they are afraid of testing, evaluating, and upgrading.
You're absolutely right. That's such an astute observation. And when you look at this again, when we think about the Parklet typology, it's been a 12-year experiment, and it will continue to be something that we learn from and that we change and we evolve to suit the demands of the moment.
Also, exactly, adapt and respond to the challenges for that specific time.
Yeah.
So, like I imagine, for 12 years ago, you will never have a program like this you have today, right?
Yeah.
So it's about testing.
Yeah.
So what are the challenges that you face, like the program face now?
Well, there are a lot, I think, and they're all good problems.
Good problems.
They are, yeah. We went from 60 Parklets 3 years ago to 1,260 Parklets.
Wow.
In the present day. So it's a huge portfolio. I think making sure that every Parklet is safe, that there's universal access for persons with disabilities. That's a real practical, challenge. Moving forward, I would like to see, again, more diversification in who is creating these places in public. There is a type of Parklet you can create that is still a fully publicly accessible facility. You might be a church, you might be a youth group, you might be an art gallery or something like that. So incentivizing that kind of sponsorship and helping these groups with a clear public interest mission bring their work to the out of doors and partner with each other. So I'd love to see that. We also, as a consequence of the mayor's budget allocation, Mayor Breed, has been very generous in helping to incubate and to accelerate this program. So we have budget this year, part of which will go to arts and culture grants.
Nice.
So I'd like to see how visual artists, musicians, spoken word artists, dancers, others, can be supported and doing their work in public spaces, not just in Parklets, but in other parts of the Shared Spaces program.
Yeah.
Because the arts ecosystem is an important part of what makes a city a city.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, aside from small businesses, the most vulnerable folks that are the first to be displaced out of their working, spaces, out of their studios, et cetera. So I'm really interested in engaging artists, performing artists, visual artists, and then also the kind of arts as social practice, and connecting that more and more with our civic agenda.
Mm-hmm. And Robin, tell me about you. What are your challenges?
What are my challenges? Yeah. Where do we begin? No, there's, being a bureaucrat or a guerrilla bureaucrat, as some of my friends back home. Guerrilla bureaucrat.
What does it mean?
Yeah, just somebody who's working within the system and trying to transform and reformulate how we're doing things from within the institution. Right? Yeah. That remains really challenging. I think we've had some very progressive and forward focused mayors, Mayor Breed. I mentioned Mayor Gavin Newsom before, who's now our state governor, who have been really interested in innovation and pushing the bureaucracy, to think about becoming more efficient, more creative around issues of the public realm. But that's a lot of detailed hard work that has to happen inside, and transforming bureaucratic culture is, that is a decades long project. And I think we've moved the needle in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So that I think that remains really challenging. And part of the happy challenge too is, like you said earlier, we're testing, right? We're testing programs like this. They're iterating. Parklets themselves as a physical typology will, Mustafa's Pizzeria might look different 5 years ago to today. 5 years from now, you might be changing how it looks, how it functions, how it works. And the same is true for a public program. The same is true for public policy and code. So I think just trying to, balance all of the interests and maintain an equilibrium with everyone who cares so much about what's happening and does want to see this succeed. It's a kind of art form, that you practice as a civil servant, as a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
So,
and usually when we talk about the future, we talk, okay, what's the plan, the goals, and so on. But here I ask, what scares you from the future related to Parklet's program?
We've built up so much momentum and have demonstrated what change can look like, right? Not only in the last 2 years over COVID, but over the last 10 years. And I just want us to keep that momentum going. We want to maintain that forward movement. And I suspect that this program and other programs related to it will be legislated again and again. And so, sometimes in the moment it might feel that we're, peeling back or maybe taking a little bit of a step backwards or sideways. But I think when you look at the long trajectory and the long arc of how parklets have evolved in San Francisco and just how it's impacted urban planning and urban design as a practice, in the long term, we're moving in the right direction. So, but I'll be honest, that gives me anxiety sometimes.
And to like all other cities, let's is Parklet something like luxury and fancy and trendy to have, or no? They should really start a proper program and consider it as a serious typology within a city. It's not like something temporary. You have it just because it's fun,
I think it can be all of those things. I think whatever the entry point is that you need in your own city, in your own context, working with your own city council or working with the communities in your neighborhoods. I don't think that parklets need to be fancy haute design. They can be very simple. They can be temporary pilots. Some communities want more investment and they're ready for more investment, so that's also appropriate. I think what's important about, tactical urbanism and the pilot or temporary phases of these kinds of physical interventions is that they're a low stakes way of testing whether it's a physical idea or maybe a configuration for stewardship, maintenance. So I still continue to believe that that's an important iteration. It's an important phase. Though some might feel like it's less of an investment than they deserve. And, that's a really valid sentiment.
And from your experience, what are the keys that make Parklet so successful, like the key elements?
Key elements, I think land use. Parklets need to go in a situation where they're supported by the other activities and the other land uses in the immediate vicinity. That's absolutely requisite for a parklet to be successsul. It's not there to solve a problem in and of itself, right? It's there to amplify, take advantage of opportunity and amplify and be that element that can change the dynamic in a place. Commitment too from whomever is sponsoring the parklet. It's a huge responsibility to create something, build something, make this capital investment, maintain it over time. And I think during the pandemic, we saw many shopkeepers and restaurateurs very quickly put a parklet because it was necessary to survive. They couldn't serve people inside. But it might not turn out to be long-term the best or the right investment for them, 10 years, maybe for 2 years. So I think commitment from the sponsor is also really important. And design, I'm a landscape architect.
I can imagine this is like the most interesting thing for you. The material design.
Yeah, well, is it designed to function well and fit into the context, And yes, are the materials, are they good materials? Is it, an elegant design? And parklets can be very simple, just a few elements, to demarcate a space and create an atmosphere, create an invitation.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of that is the semiotics of design.
So I will give you a case because you're a designer. You see here outdoor.
Yeah.
If we will have a parklet here, fits to the context. What this parklet will have, like what kind of parklet?
Well, okay, so we are sitting just outside the Liceu Teatro in Pontevedra, Spain.
Yeah.
Looking out on this little plaza. And seating, movable seating. I think in a condition like this in our plaza where there's no distinction between the road and the curb, it's kind of what we would call in San Francisco a shared street.
Yeah.
Where everybody's mixing. Movable furnishings are going to be really important because then you can reconfigure the space for different times of day, maybe different events, different festivals.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's important to have fixed structures. If there was a parking lane where most people expect to put their car, then you should, it's probably best to have a fixed structure there. But I don't think that we would need that in this location. And the mayor of Pontevedra has done a lot of work over his long tenure. And so you can look out on the square and see that there's really great nighttime lighting.
True.
Yeah. The lighting, the public lighting design in Pontevedra is top notch.
Yeah.
Walking around in the evenings is really pleasant.
Yeah. So maybe sometimes we don't need a parklet, right? It's not like having a parklet just because we should have. It's like about the context.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not always the right gesture.
Yeah.
To address the issues or the problems at the site.
What do you think is the future of parklets? Will they disappear?
I don't think
so. As
a
typology?
No, I don't think so. I think they'll continue to evolve and have relevance. Again, to respond to the demands of the moment, the needs of the site and the place. What we are seeing, though, is that as a consequence of parklets, certainly in San Francisco, and I believe in other cities, is that we of course changed the physical landscape, but we've also changed the mental landscape, the cultural landscape, and a little bit of the psychology about what we need our streets and sidewalks to do. So now we can have conversations about widening sidewalks, widening footpaths, narrowing streets, perhaps closing streets entirely to full-time traffic and having them be more mixed conditions. I think that's the real outcome to celebrate part of this program. Aside from the beautiful little sites all over the city, it's when we think about the city as a whole organism and we think about our collective mentality. There's been a transformation, absolutely. So I don't think they'll go away, but they are leading us to a different place that's hopefully more sustainable, that's safer to walk around.
Yeah. And Robin, we are here for the Placemaking Europe Week.
That's right.
Many placemakers listening to us now.
Yeah.
So what should placemakers stop doing?
Oh, wow. Okay, I love this question. I think that, so placemakers, we create value, right? We create capital in places, or we help to amplify the capital, to grow and cultivate the capital that's already in place. That could be social capital, it could be political capital, and certainly economic value.
Yeah.
Right. That's a clear outcome. That's a clear consequence of what happens when we work in communities. Now, I think it's really important for us to be critical about where we work, when we work, and who we work for. Does the work that we do as placemakers, this value creation, accrue to the communities that we are trying to help, try to serve? And so I think especially as we interact with our development partners and, we're looking at sometimes wholesale redevelopment of former industrial districts or rejuvenation schemes, I want us to be really critical and attentive to whether or not what we do results in, for example, displacement of the demographics and the communities that we're wanting to amplify and to lift up. So I think there are different ways to approach that depending on the situation and context. And I think that it's also important for our development partners, folks in that sector, to take that seriously, because ultimately we're here to advocate for diversity, demographically and otherwise, that make places what they are.
Yeah.
So we should stop doing that if we're doing that.
Yeah. And what should we start doing or keep doing of what we do today?
We're placemakers, and we work in physical places. I'm a landscape architect, thinking about design.
Yeah.
But I think moving forward, Carmen Mays has talked a lot about this here this week in her addresses to our big group. We can center our work on healing, on justice, on issues of reparation. And, we're working in parks and squares and streets. These are physical places, but they're also landscapes, they're landscapes of psychology, they're landscapes of emotion, they're landscapes where sometimes intergenerational trauma has been experienced, and we continue to experience that. Different parts of our communities do. So placemaking, because this is a practice that is about building togetherness and deepening empathy, that could be across demographics, what have you. I think it's a really powerful way for us to address social, psychological, political questions, conflicts that we have.
Yeah.
So there are many different ways that can happen. But I think centering that more and more, leads us to civic engagement. It leads us to, more and more social integration, which is what we're going to need to solve any problem or have any discussion about anything.
Exactly. It's really interesting to talk to you, and I'm really happy. I will not take much of your time because I know you want to be part of the different activities within the program. And so now we are in the end of the last section of the episode, and it's about you giving messages. So the first message is gonna be to Pontevedra. What should they think about when they will continue developing the city?
Yeah, well, I've only been here for a few days. I think most of us have only been here for a few days, so it's hard to formulate a specific piece of advice. And it seems like this place is functioning really well. The certainly the urban environment and urban design is really well handled. And I think the mayor here has done a lot of work to make this like a thriving center of the region.
Yeah.
So I'd say just keep going, keep doing what you're doing.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been a lovely place to have a gathering.
Yeah. And 3 takeaway messages to our listeners.
3 takeaway messages. I would say support the technocrats and the bureaucrats who are in departments and governments who are trying to transform things, because they're in there, we're in there. Come find us. If you are working out in community, we need to leverage one another to make change and make transformation. That's been my experience in San Francisco over the last 10 years. I couldn't get through my job or do what I do. We couldn't make the things that we make unless there's this kind of partnership and this coalescence about transformation. So don't be mean to your technocrats. There are some of them in there who are really trying to change things.
True.
Yeah. So I would say that. I would also say that find ways to support the retention of artists in your communities. one thing that I do in San Francisco, aside from the job that I've described, is sit on the board of the Community Arts Stabilization Trust. And one of the things that its main mission, its main focus, is to help artists stay in place and continue to practice in place. And so there are many different ways that happens. Helping groups own a physical location.
Yeah.
Or helping artists have access to a permanent physical location. So wherever you are in the world, supporting your artists in your local communities is really, really important. Helping them stay in place. And then let's see, the last thing that I would mention, I think, just going back to healing, justice, and reparation. We're all in this because we're trying to progress where we are collectively, and we all have a responsibility, an opportunity to work on that advancement. So that can look like many different things and in many different ways, but investigate your own, as a practitioner, you can investigate your own positionality within structures of power, which within, paradigms of racism, of white supremacy, of economic disenfranchisement and oppression. And, you could leverage the privilege and the power, the intellect, the talent that you have to reconstruct those things so that there's more equity, in communities. That's what placemaking can do.
Yeah. Robin, can you repeat the 3 words? I love them.
Sure. So as placemakers, we have an opportunity to center healing, justice, and reparation.
Wow. And the last question is going to be you asking it to the listeners. It's not me this time. So what is your question to us?
What is your favorite public space? And if it doesn't exist where you live, where you're based, how can you bring that feeling to where you live and where you work?
Thank you so much, Robin. You're doing a great job, so keep up the good work.
Thank you for having me, Mustafa. This is really fun.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica Podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You learned something new and also got inspired by the guest. Don't forget to share the episode on your social media and recommend it to people you think they are really interested in this topic. Thank you so much again for giving your valuable time to Urbanistica Podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.